Hi, I'm Cassandra. I was supposed to be in Denver for 3 more days, but my conference ended early. I came home to surprise my husband and instead found him with his secretary in our bedroom. Not just talking, not just working late, in our bed. The bed I picked out, the sheets I washed every Sunday, the room where we promised each other forever. No warning, no conversation, just betrayal served on Egyptian cotton. He thought I was weak, dependent, grateful. Instead, I disappeared. And when they finally realized what they'd lost, it was already too late. Before we dive back in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is something truly special I can't wait to share. I wasn't supposed to be home until Thursday. The digital marketing conference in Denver was scheduled to run through Wednesday evening, but the keynote speaker came down with food poisoning and they canceled the final day. At 6 a.m. Tuesday morning, I was standing in the hotel lobby with my wheeled suitcase, breathing in that artificial pine scent they pump through the air conditioning, watching other attendees mill around the Continental breakfast station in confusion. Flight change fee waived due to conference cancellation, the airline representative had said cheerfully over the phone. We can get you on the 2:15 p.m. back to Millbrook. Millbrook, our little slice of suburban paradise 40 minutes outside the city, where the lawns are always green and the neighbors wave from their driveways every morning, where my husband Daniel and I had bought our first house 3 years ago, a colonial with blue shutters and a wraparound porch that made me feel like we were living in a magazine spread. I should have called him, should have texted, but something in me wanted to surprise him. Maybe it was the guilt from being away so much lately, building my consulting business, missing our Tuesday night dinners and Sunday morning pancakes. Maybe it was the excitement of seeing his face light up when I walked through the door 12 hours early. The flight was smooth, 45 minutes of cloudless skies and airplane Wi-Fi that actually worked. I used the time to finish responding to client emails, already mentally planning how I'd spend my unexpected free evening. Maybe I'd cook that pasta dish Daniel loved, the one with the sun-dried tomatoes and fresh basil. Maybe we'd open that bottle of wine we'd been saving, curl up on the couch, and actually talk without laptops or phones between us. The Uber driver, a chatty woman named Priya, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. You look happy, she said, as we turned onto Maple Street. Good trip? Getting better by the minute, I replied, already picturing Daniel's surprised smile. Our house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, behind a row of maple trees that were just starting to turn orange at the edges. October in Millbrook was postcard perfect, all crisp air and golden light. I paid Priya, grabbed my suitcase, and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, just appreciating the sight of home. That's when I noticed the silver Lexus in our driveway. I knew that car, sleek, pristine, with personalized plates that read Raven 7. Raven Sinclair, Daniel's executive assistant at Meridian Financial. She'd been working for him for 8 months, ever since his company expanded and he got promoted to senior partner. Efficient, professional, always perfectly dressed in those tailored blazers and pencil skirts that made me feel underdressed in my jeans and cardigan. He's always said, when I asked about his late nights at the office, she's invaluable. I don't know how I have managed without her. I stared at the Lexus, my mind trying to process why Raven would be at our house at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Maybe they were working on the Morrison account from home. Daniel had mentioned it was a big presentation due Thursday. Maybe the internet was down or they needed quiet space to focus. I wheeled my suitcase up the brick pathway, my heels clicking against the stones we'd carefully selected last spring. The front door was unlocked, which was unusual. Millbrook was the kind of place where people still trusted their neighbors, where kids rode bikes until dark, and no one thought twice about leaving doors unbolted during the day. I stepped into the foyer, the familiar scent of our home wrapping around me like a warm hug, vanilla candles, and the faint trace of Daniel's cologne. The house was quiet, but not empty quiet. There was an energy in the air, a presence that made me pause. Daniel? I called softly, setting my suitcase by the stairs. Honey, I'm home early. No response. I slipped off my heels, padding across the hardwood floor in my stockings. Maybe they were in his home office, deep in spreadsheets and strategy sessions. The door would be closed, music playing softly while they worked. It wouldn't be the first time Daniel got so focused he didn't hear me come home. But as I moved toward the back of the house, I heard something that made my steps falter. Laughter. Soft, intimate, definitely not work-related. And it was coming from upstairs, from our bedroom. My heart started beating faster, that sick flutter you get when your body knows something your mind isn't ready to accept. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step deliberate and silent. The sound grew clearer as I reached the landing, not just laughter now. Murmurs, movement. The bedroom door was cracked open just enough for golden afternoon light to spill into the hallway, just enough for me to see inside. And that's when my world tilted sideways. Daniel, my husband of 5 years, was lying in our bed, with the white comforter I'd washed just 3 days ago, the pillows I'd fluffed before leaving for Denver. Raven was beside him, her dark hair spilled across my pillow, wearing nothing but my silk robe, the one Daniel had given me for our anniversary last year. They weren't working on the Morrison account. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, watching my marriage dissolve in real time. Daniel's hand traced patterns on Raven's bare shoulder while she laughed at something he whispered. The intimacy of it, the casual comfort told me this wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a routine. They didn't see me. They were lost in their own world, in the fantasy they'd built in my absence, in my home, in my bed. I backed away from the door, my legs moving on autopilot. Down the stairs past my abandoned suitcase, out to the front porch where the October air hit my face like a slap. I sat on the porch swing Daniel had installed last summer, the one where we'd planned to grow old together, and stared at Raven's Lexus gleaming in my driveway. That's when something shifted inside me. Not heartbreak, not yet. Not the screaming rage that would come later. Just a cold, crystalline clarity that cut through all the shock and confusion. I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never done before. I started recording. This wasn't just about catching them. This was about documenting the moment my old life ended and my new one began, because sitting on that porch swing, listening to my husband and his secretary in my bedroom, I realized something important. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I was going to disappear. And when the dust settled, they'd realize they just lost the best thing that ever happened to them. But first, I needed evidence. And I needed a plan. The conference in Denver had taught me more than just digital marketing strategies. It had reminded me who I was before I became Daniel's wife, before I started measuring my worth by his approval and his comfort. I was Cassandra Brooks, successful consultant, independent woman, and apparently someone who was about to show two cheaters exactly what they'd thrown away. I just didn't know yet how loud that lesson was going to be. It took a lot of care and time to prepare and narrate this for you, so if you're enjoying it, a quick subscribe really helps and means the world to us. All right, let's get back to it. I need to tell you how we got here, because betrayal doesn't happen overnight. It's built on a foundation of small compromises, tiny erosions of respect that you don't notice until the ground gives way beneath your feet. Daniel and I met 6 years ago at a networking event in the city. I was 28, running my own digital marketing consultancy from a cramped studio apartment above a coffee shop. He was 32, sharp-suited and confident, working his way up at Meridian Financial. When he approached me by the appetizer table, I was discussing conversion rates with a potential client, gesturing with a mini quiche. "You know your stuff," he said after the client walked away with my business card. "Most people in marketing just throw around buzzwords and hope something sticks." I laughed. "Most people in finance think marketing is just pretty pictures and catchy slogans." Touché.
He extended his hand. Daniel Ashworth. And you're clearly not most people. The chemistry was immediate, electric. He was charming without being smarmy, successful without being arrogant. On our first date, he listened intently as I explained my 5-year business plan, asked thoughtful questions about my clients, never once suggested I might want something more stable or traditional. We moved in together after 8 months, married a year later in a small ceremony at Rosewood Manor, a historic estate 20 minutes from Millbrook. My parents flew in from Portland, his from Boston. Raven wasn't there then. She didn't exist in our world yet.
Those first 2 years were golden. Daniel supported my business, bragged about my successes to his colleagues. When I landed the Hartwell Corporation account, my biggest client to date, he took me to Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in the city, and toasted my achievement with champagne that cost more than my rent used to be. "To my brilliant wife," he said, raising his glass, "who's going to be running her own empire someday." I believed him. More importantly, I believed in us. But success, I learned, can be a double-edged sword. As my business grew, I traveled more. Client meetings in Chicago, conferences in Seattle, strategy sessions in Atlanta. Daniel was promoted to senior partner at Meridian, which came with longer hours and bigger responsibilities. We started passing each other like ships in the night, communicating through sticky notes on the refrigerator and text messages between meetings. "Miss you" became "running late." "Can't wait to see you" became "don't wait up." "Love you" became "left dinner in the fridge." The erosion was so gradual, I didn't notice it happening, like watching your hair grow or your face age. The changes too small to register day by day, but startling when you finally step back and see the bigger picture. That's when Raven entered our story. Meridian was expanding, and Daniel needed an executive assistant who could handle his increasingly complex schedule. The previous assistant, Mrs. Patterson, had been 63 and perfectly professional, treating Daniel like a favorite nephew and me like the daughter she'd never had. She sent us anniversary cards and always asked about my latest clients when I stopped by the office. When Mrs. Patterson retired, Daniel interviewed a dozen candidates. Raven Sinclair walked into his office on a Tuesday morning in February, 8 months ago, with a Harvard MBA, 5 years of executive experience, and what Daniel described as the most organized portfolio I've ever seen. She was 26, stunning in that effortless way that made other women feel like they were trying too hard. Long black hair, always perfectly styled, designer clothes that fit like they were tailored specifically for her body, makeup that enhanced rather than covered. When Daniel introduced us at the office Valentine's Day party, she shook my hand with a smile that was warm but not quite reaching her eyes. "Daniel talks about you constantly," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Your business sounds fascinating. Digital marketing is so complex these days." "It keeps me busy," I replied, immediately feeling underdressed in my off-the-rack blazer next to her designer everything. "Raven has some great insights about digital strategy," Daniel chimed in. "She's been helping me understand how Meridian could better leverage social media for client acquisition." I felt a tiny prick of something, not quite jealousy, but territorial awareness. Marketing was my domain, the thing I was known for, the expertise that made me valuable. But I pushed the feeling down. Daniel was just being supportive of his new assistant. It was good that they worked well together. The changes started small. Daniel began staying later at the office, working on what he called strategic initiatives with Raven. Weekend work became more frequent. He'd leave Saturday morning for client presentations and return Sunday evening, apologizing for missing our traditional Sunday brunch, but energized in a way I hadn't seen in months. "Raven's incredible," he'd say, loosening his tie after another late night. "She anticipates everything I need before I even know I need it. Makes me look brilliant in meetings." I tried to be supportive. A good assistant was worth their weight in gold, and Daniel's career was important. His success was our success.
The bigger his bonuses, the more financial security we had, the faster we could pay off the house and maybe start thinking about expanding our family. But slowly, insidiously, I began to feel like a third wheel in my own marriage. Daniel started mentioning Raven's opinions more frequently. Raven thinks we should renovate the bathroom. Raven suggested that restaurant for your birthday dinner. Raven says wives who travel as much as you do need to be more understanding about their husband's work demands. That one stopped me cold. We were getting ready for bed, Daniel brushing his teeth, while I applied moisturizer, and the words hung in the air like smoke. Raven said, "What? About wives who travel?" I asked, carefully. He spat into the sink, avoiding my eyes in the mirror. Just that it's hard on marriages when one person is always gone. She's not wrong, Cass. Sometimes I feel like I barely see you anymore. My business is important too, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You used to understand that. I do understand. I'm just saying maybe we need to find a better balance. But what he meant, I realize now, was that maybe I needed to find a better balance. He never suggested cutting back on his own travel, his own late nights, his own career ambitions. The compromise, as always, was supposed to come from me.
I started declining some out-of-town clients, turning down speaking engagements, working from home more often. I told myself I was investing in my marriage, prioritizing what mattered most. But every time I walked into Daniel's office and saw Raven at her desk, perfectly put together, completely dedicated, always available, I felt something crucial slipping away. She was becoming the woman I used to be in Daniel's life, the one who made him feel successful, supported, important. Well, I was becoming the wife who nagged about communication and complained about feeling neglected. The night before I left for Denver, we had what I thought was a breakthrough conversation. Daniel apologized for being distant, promised we'd plan a weekend getaway when I got back, said he missed the way we used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. "I love you, Cass," he said, pulling me close as we lay in bed. "I know I've been distracted with work, but you're still the most important thing in my life." I believed him. God help me, I wanted to believe him so desperately that I ignored every red flag, every warning sign, every instinct that whispered something was wrong. The morning I left for Denver, Daniel kissed me goodbye at the door, promised to miss me, said he'd probably work from home while I was gone to catch up on some reports. Normal husband, normal goodbye, normal life. Except nothing about our life had been normal for months. I just hadn't been home long enough to see it clearly. Now, sitting on our porch swing with Raven's Lexus gleaming on our driveway and my husband's betrayal playing out in our bedroom, I could see the whole ugly picture. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls he took in the other room, the way he'd started showering immediately when he came home from work, the new cologne that wasn't the one I'd bought him for Christmas. All those signs I'd rationalized away, explained with work stress and career pressures and the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. I'd been so busy building my own success that I'd missed the construction of my own betrayal. But that was about to change, because sitting there in the October afternoon sun, I realized something that would have terrified the old Cassandra, but energized this new version of myself. I didn't need Daniel to validate my worth. I didn't need his approval to succeed. I didn't need his presence to feel complete. What I needed was evidence, a plan, and the courage to use both. The recording app on my phone was already running. Time to gather the ammunition I'd need for the war I hadn't known I was fighting. I sat on that porch swing for exactly 17 minutes. I know because I watched the digital clock on my phone tick forward while my mind processed what I'd just witnessed. 17 minutes of autumn breeze rustling through the maple leaves, 17 minutes of my neighbors going about their normal Tuesday routines, 17 minutes of my world fracturing into before and after. The recording app on my phone showed a red dot, still capturing audio from inside the house. I could hear muffled sounds through the walls, laughter, movement, the creak of bed springs I'd helped pick out at the furniture store last spring. Each sound felt like a physical blow, but I kept the app running. Evidence first, emotions later. At minute 18, I stood up and walked back into my house. I moved like a ghost through rooms that suddenly felt foreign. The family photos on the mantle, our wedding day, last Christmas, the vacation to Napa Valley where Daniel proposed a toast to many more adventures together, now looked like evidence from a crime scene. The throw pillows I'd carefully arranged that morning before my Uber arrived were still perfectly placed, as if the house itself was maintaining the illusion of a happy marriage. I climbed the stairs again, each step deliberate and silent. The bedroom door was still cracked open, the voices inside more audible now. "Should probably getting going soon," Raven was saying, her voice lazy with satisfaction. Miss Patterson always said afternoon meetings were suspicious, even when they were legitimate. Daniel chuckled, a sound I recognized as his post-sex contentment laugh. I'd heard him hundreds of times over 5 years of marriage. Now it felt like someone was scraping glass across my chest. Miss Patterson was paranoid. Besides, Cassandra won't be back until Thursday. We have time. Still, Raven's voice carried a note of caution. She said she's been asking more questions lately. About the late nights, the weekend work. Cassandra asks questions about everything. It's what she does for a living. Analyze, strategize, optimize. She can't help herself. The casual dismissiveness in his voice hit harder than the betrayal itself. This wasn't heat-of-the-moment passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. They talked about me like I was a problem to be managed, an obstacle to navigate around. They had strategies for deceiving me.
Does she suspect anything? Raven asked, and I could hear rustling, probably getting dressed. No, Daniel said with certainty that felt like another slap. Cassandra's too focused on her business to pay attention to what's happening at home. Half the time, I don't think she'd notice if I disappeared for a week. I pressed myself against the hallway wall, phone still recording, heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it downstairs. Part of me wanted to burst through that door screaming, to confront them with the righteous fury of a betrayed wife. But a larger part of me, the part that had built a successful business from nothing, the part that knew how to think strategically under pressure, whispered, "Wait. Listen. Learn." "I feel bad sometimes," Raven continued, and there was something almost convincing about the regret in her voice. "She seems nice when I meet her at office events, always asks about my weekend, remembers details about my life." "Cassandra's good at that," Daniel said. "It's part of her job, making people feel important and remembered. But it's not the same as actually being present, you know? She's physically here, but mentally she's always somewhere else. Some client, some project, some conference." I bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. 3 months ago, I turned down a lucrative contract with a tech startup in San Francisco because it would have required monthly travel. I'd told Daniel I wanted to prioritize our marriage, focus on being home more. He'd smiled and thanked me, then apparently used my increased presence as cover for his affair. "When did you know?" Raven asked softly. "Know what?" "That you didn't love her anymore." The question hung in the air like smoke. I held my breath, waiting for his answer, praying for some small mercy, some indication that this was about lust rather than lost love. "I don't think it was a moment," Daniel said finally. "More like gradual disappointment. She used to be different when we first met. Hummery, ambitious, but also present. She'd ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. Now she asks while checking emails on her phone." "Maybe that's just what happens in marriages," Raven offered. "Maybe. Or maybe I just settled for someone safe instead of someone who truly understood me." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Safe. Like I was a reliable sedan when he really wanted a sports car. Like I was the sensible choice he'd outgrown now that he could afford something flashier. "What happens now?" Raven asked. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "I keep telling myself this is temporary, just something I need to get out of my system. But every time I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be truly wanted, not just needed. And every time I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be someone's first choice," Raven said quietly. I closed my eyes, letting that particular knife twist. First choice. When had I stopped being Daniel's first choice? When had I become the obligation instead of the desire? "We should go," Raven said, breaking the moment. "I have that client call at 6, and you said you'd review the Morrison presentation tonight." "Right. Work never ends."
I heard movement, feet hitting the floor, the sound of clothes being gathered. I had maybe 5 minutes before they came downstairs. I crept back down the hallway and descended the stairs as quietly as possible, slipping out the front door and positioning myself behind the large oak tree in our front yard. My phone was still recording when they finally emerged. Daniel first, looking exactly like the husband who'd kissed me goodbye that morning, rumpled from a day of working from home, checking his phone with the distracted air of a busy professional. Raven followed, her hair perfectly styled despite the afternoon's activities, briefcase in hand like she really had been there for business. They didn't kiss goodbye. That would have been too risky, too much like a real relationship. Instead, Daniel walked her to her car with the casual politeness of a boss seeing off an employee. But I caught the way his hand lingered on her car door, the way she looked back at him before driving away, the satisfied smile that played at the corners of his mouth as he watched her Lexus disappear down Maple Street. When he went back inside, I stayed behind the tree for another 10 minutes, letting the full weight of discovery settle over me. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a relationship, complete with inside jokes and intimate conversations and discussions about our future. They'd been building something together, while I'd been trying to save a marriage that was already over.
My phone showed 43 minutes of recorded audio, 43 minutes of evidence that my husband and his assistant had been having an affair in my bed, in my house, on what was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday afternoon while I was away building a career he'd once claimed to admire. I could go inside now, confront him with the recording, demand explanations, fight for a marriage that clearly meant more to me than it did to him. I could scream and cry and beg him to choose me over her, to remember the love we used to share, to try harder, be better, fight for us. But sitting there behind that oak tree, something crystallized in my mind. A clarity that cut through all the hurt and shock and betrayal like a blade through silk. I wasn't going to fight for someone who talked about me like I was a burden. I wasn't going to beg someone to love me who'd already given his heart to someone else. I wasn't going to compete for a man who'd made me his consolation prize while making another woman his grand prize. Instead, I was going to disappear. Not dramatically, not with ultimatums or threats or grand gestures. I was going to quietly, methodically extract myself from the situation and let them discover exactly what they'd thrown away. But first, I needed to get back in that house and pretend to be the unsuspecting wife for just a little while longer. Because I had a plan forming, and it required Daniel to believe he was still fooling me. I walked back to the front door, took a deep breath, and prepared to give the performance of my life. "Daniel!" I called out as I stepped inside, injecting just the right amount of excited energy into my voice. "Honey, I'm home! The conference ended early and I caught an earlier flight." I heard him moving around upstairs, probably changing clothes, erasing evidence, transforming back into the faithful husband he'd been pretending to be for months. "Cass?" His voice carried down the stairs, and I could hear the surprise, maybe even a hint of panic. "You're early. I thought you weren't coming back until Thursday." "I missed you too much to stay away," I called back, setting my suitcase down exactly where I'd left it an hour ago. "Come down here and give me a proper welcome home." When he appeared at the top of the stairs, hair slightly muscled, wearing a different shirt than the one he'd had on that morning, I smiled at him like nothing had changed, like I was still the woman who trusted him completely, who believed in us, who had no idea her entire life was built on lies. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, jogging down the stairs to sweep me into a hug that felt like a performance for an audience of one. "Miss me?" I asked, looking up into eyes that had looked at another woman with real desire just 20 minutes earlier. "Every minute," he lied smoothly, kissing my forehead with practiced affection. And I let him lie, because sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot or cold, it's served strategically with perfect timing and devastating precision. I had work to do.
Playing the role of the unsuspecting wife required more acting skill than I ever possessed, but desperation is a powerful motivator. For the next 2 days, I smiled at Daniel's lies, laughed at his jokes, and pretended our marriage wasn't decomposing in real time. Meanwhile, I was building a case that would have made any divorce attorney proud. Wednesday morning, while Daniel showered, I accessed our home computer and began what I mentally called Operation Documentation. Years of running my own business had taught me the importance of keeping meticulous records. Now those skills were about to serve a very different purpose. I started with our banking. Daniel had always insisted on keeping our finances somewhat separate. It's healthier for couples to maintain some independence, he said when we moved in together. At the time, I thought it was mature, progressive. Now I realized it had been strategic. While I had been transparent about my business accounts, my income, my investments, Daniel had maintained a wall of financial privacy I'd been too trusting to question. But trust works both ways, and Daniel had always been careless about passwords. His laptop password was still Meridian 2019, the year he got his promotion. His phone used the same 6-digit code he'd been using since we met, our wedding date. And his email password, which he never bothered to change, was CassMine, with a heart symbol. The irony made my stomach turn. Within an hour, I had access to bank statements that told a story of deception so thorough it took my breath away. The joint checking account we used for household expenses was only one piece of a much larger financial puzzle. Daniel had 3 other accounts I'd never known about, including a savings account with over $80,000, money that should have been discussed between married partners planning a future together.
But it was the credit card statements that really opened my eyes. Charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotels in the city during weekdays when he claimed to be working late, jewelry purchases from Tiffany's that had never appeared on my finger, a particularly large charge from Victoria's Secret from last month for lingerie I'd certainly never received. The amounts were staggering. Daniel had been financing an entire secret life, complete with romantic gestures and expensive gifts for his mistress. I screenshotted everything, creating a digital paper trail that told the story of a man living a double life. Then I dug deeper. His email revealed a correspondence that read like a romance novel I never wanted to be part of. Messages to Raven dating back 6 months, starting professional and gradually becoming intimate, then passionate, then practical as they coordinated their affair around my travel schedule. Cass is in Seattle until Friday. Can you come over Thursday night? The Morrison presentation is just an excuse. I need to see you. She's so focused on her client calls, she doesn't even notice when I'm not listening anymore. Each message was a small knife, but I kept reading, kept documenting, kept building my case, because mixed in with the romantic declarations and meeting arrangements were discussions about me that revealed just how little respect my husband had for the woman he'd promised to love and honor. Sometimes I wonder if Cassandra even wants to be married anymore. She's more excited about landing a new client than spending time with me. The irony is that her success is what attracted me to her originally, but now it's what's driving us apart. Raven, you make me feel like the man I used to be before I became just another item on Cassandra's to-do list. I had to stop reading twice to compose myself, but I pushed through. This wasn't about my hurt feelings anymore. This was about strategy, about building an airtight case for when I finally revealed my hand. The most damaging evidence came from text messages between Daniel and Raven discussing their future plans. Screenshots of apartment listings in the city, discussions about when and how Daniel should leave me, calculations about alimony and asset division that showed they'd been planning their future together while I'd been planning our anniversary dinner. My lawyer says if I can prove Cassandra's traveling affected our marriage quality, I might be able to reduce any alimony payments, Daniel had texted just last week. You shouldn't have to pay her for the privilege of being neglected, Raven had replied. Once this is all over, we can finally be together properly. No more sneaking around, no more pretending. I can't wait to be your first choice instead of my secret.
Reading those messages, I felt something inside me crystallize into diamond-hard resolve. They weren't just betraying me, they were planning to gaslight me into believing I was somehow responsible for the destruction of my own marriage. They were going to paint me as the neglectful wife who drove her husband into another woman's arms, then tried to minimize their financial obligations to me based on that fiction. That's when I knew my strategy had to be more than just documentation. It had to be complete financial protection. While Daniel was at work Wednesday afternoon, and I had no illusions about what work meant anymore, I made a series of phone calls that would have made my business school professors proud. First, I called Marcus Chen, the attorney who'd helped me incorporate my consulting business 3 years ago. Marcus was discreet, thorough, and had no connection to Daniel's social or professional circles. I need to discuss some preventative legal measures, I told him, speaking in the coded language that attorneys understand. A hypothetical situation involving asset protection in the event of marital dissolution. Of course, Marcus said smoothly. Hypothetical situations require the most careful preparation. Can you come in tomorrow? Next, I called my accountant, Patricia Hoffman. Patricia had been handling my business finances since I'd started consulting, and she knew my financial situation better than I did. Patricia, I need a complete audit of my business assets, personal investments, and any joint accounts, and I need it to be absolutely confidential. Are we talking about a business restructuring? She asked carefully. We're talking about protecting what I've built, I replied. My third call was to my bank. I'd been with First National for over a decade, and my relationship manager, David Torres, had always been helpful with my business banking needs. David, I need to discuss some account modifications. Specifically, I want to understand my options for converting joint accounts to individual accounts and what documentation I'd need to protect my business assets from any future complications.
I understand completely, David said. Why don't you come in Friday morning? We'll have privacy and time to discuss all your options. Each conversation was conducted in professional code, but the message was clear. I was preparing for war, and I intended to win. That evening, Daniel came home with takeout from Chang's Garden, my favorite Chinese restaurant. He'd even remembered to get extra spring rolls, the way he used to when we were dating. The gesture would have melted my heart a week ago. Now it felt like a calculated move in a game I was finally learning how to play. I thought we could have a quiet night in, he said, setting the containers on our dining room table. I feel like we haven't talked in forever. That sounds perfect, I said, meaning every word, because we were definitely going to talk, just not in the way he expected. Over mushu pork and fried rice, Daniel asked about my Denver conference with what seemed like genuine interest. He listened as I described the keynote presentations, the networking events, the new industry trends I'd learned about. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, when we could talk for hours about our respective careers, supporting each other's ambitions and celebrating each other's successes. Then, my phone buzzed with a text message. Daniel glanced at it automatically, a habit from years of marriage, and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly when he saw the sender's name. The message was from Marcus Chen. Looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. I've cleared my schedule to give your situation the attention it deserves. Work stuff? Daniel asked casually, but I caught the slight tension in his voice. Just some contract reviews, I lied smoothly, matching his tone perfectly. Boring legal stuff. He nodded and changed the subject, but I noticed he was more distracted for the rest of the evening, checking his phone more frequently, responding to what he claimed were work emails with unusual intensity. Later that night, as we lay in bed, the same bed where he'd been with Raven 2 days earlier, Daniel pulled me close and whispered, "I love you, Cass. I know I haven't been the best husband lately, but I want you to know that you're the most important thing in my life." The words that should have been a balm felt like acid on an open wound, because I knew now that when Daniel said I was the most important thing in his life, he meant I was the most important obstacle to the life he really wanted. "I love you too," I whispered back, and amazingly, part of me still meant it. I loved the man I'd married, the man who'd supported my dreams and celebrated my successes.
I just wasn't sure that man had ever really existed, or if he'd been another performance, another role Daniel played when it suited his purposes. As he fell asleep beside me, I stared at the ceiling and finalized my plans. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Marcus Chen to discuss my legal options. Friday, I'd restructure my banking to protect my assets. And sometime soon, I'd reveal my hand in a way that would show Daniel and Raven exactly what they'd lost when they decided to build their future on the ruins of my trust. But tonight, I'd let them think they were still in control. Let them believe their secret was safe, their deception complete. Because the best strategy isn't always the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quietest, most methodical approach that creates the most devastating impact. I was done being the wife who didn't pay attention. Now I was going to be the woman who saw everything, planned everything, and executed everything with the precision they taught me was necessary by treating me like I was too stupid to notice their betrayal. They wanted to play games with my life? Fine, but they were about to discover they'd been playing against a much more skilled opponent than they'd realized. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October clarity that makes everything seem possible. I woke before my alarm, slipping out of bed while Daniel still slept, his arm unconsciously reaching for the space I'd vacated. For a moment, watching him in the early morning light filtering through our bedroom curtains, I almost wavered. He looked peaceful, vulnerable, like the man who used to make me breakfast on Saturday mornings and leave little notes in my laptop bag when I traveled. But then I remembered Raven's voice in this same room 2 days ago, and my resolute crystallized again. I dressed carefully for my meeting with Marcus Chen, professional but not overdressed, confident but not aggressive. The navy blazer I'd worn to close my biggest client deal last year, paired with simple pearls Daniel had given me for our 3rd anniversary. If I was going to dismantle my life, I'd do it looking like the successful woman I'd worked so hard to become. "You're up early," Daniel mumbled as I gathered my purse and laptop bag.
Client meeting, I said, which wasn't technically a lie. I was about to become Marcus's client. That tech startup in Riverside wants to discuss expanding their digital strategy. Daniel nodded sleepily, already reaching for his phone to check messages. Probably from Raven, I realized with a stab of pain that was becoming more manageable each time. "Will you be home for dinner?" he asked, the question automatic after 5 years of marriage. "I'm not sure yet. Don't wait up if I'm running late." He looked up then, maybe catching something in my tone, but I was already moving toward the bedroom door. "Cass?" I turned back, and for a split second I thought he might say something real, something honest, an apology, a confession, anything that might crack open the possibility of salvage. Instead, he said, "Drive safe. Love you." "Love you too," I replied, and walked out of our bedroom for what I suspected might be the last time as his unsuspecting wife. Marcus Chen's office was located in a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel that reflected the morning sun like a mirror. His practice specialized in business law, but he'd handled enough high-net-worth divorces to know the landscape I was about to navigate. "Cassandra." He greeted me with the warm professionalism that had made me comfortable enough to trust him with my business incorporation years ago. "Please, sit. Can I get you coffee?" "Please, black." I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, notepad and printed emails arranged in front of me like battle plans. Marcus poured coffee from a silver service that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, then returned to his desk with the focused attention I remembered from our previous dealings. "You mentioned asset protection in a hypothetical marital dissolution. I assume the situation has become less hypothetical since yesterday." I pulled out my phone and played 30 seconds of the recording I'd made Tuesday afternoon, just enough to establish the nature of Daniel's betrayal without violating any legal boundaries Marcus might worry about. His expression remained professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes that told me he understood exactly what we were dealing with. "How long has this been going on?" "At least 6 months, based on the digital evidence, possibly longer." I slid copies of the most damaging emails and text messages across his desk. "They've been planning their future together, including strategies to minimize any financial obligations to me." Marcus scanned the documents with the quick efficiency of someone who'd seen this story before.
Your husband works at Meridian Financial. Senior partner, the woman is his executive assistant. Workplace affair. He made a note. That could complicate things professionally for both of them, depending on company policy. Do you know Meridian's stance on relationships between supervisors and subordinates? I felt something spark in my chest. Not quite hope, but possibility. I never thought to check. We'll look into it. Now let's discuss your assets. You mentioned wanting to protect what you've built. For the next hour, we dissected my financial life with surgical precision. My consulting business, incorporated as Brooks Digital Solutions, was entirely separate from Daniel's income and assets. My client list, contracts, and intellectual property were mine alone. The house was jointly owned, purchased with both our incomes, but I'd contributed 60% of the down payment from savings I had accumulated before our marriage. You are in a stronger position than many people in your situation, Marcus observed. Your business income actually exceeds your husband's salary, and you have documentation of significant financial contributions to joint assets. The premarital savings account you used for the house down payment establishes a pattern of financial independence. What about his hidden accounts? We'll subpoena everything during discovery, but the fact that he concealed assets while planning to leave you could work strongly in your favor. Courts don't look kindly on financial deception, especially when it's combined with marital infidelity. Marcus leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The question is, how do you want to proceed? Quietly or publicly? I thought about Daniel's reputation at Meridian, his carefully cultivated image as a devoted husband and rising star. I thought about Raven's professional aspirations and her Harvard MBA that had impressed everyone at the Valentine's Day party. I thought about all the dinner parties where they had attended as colleagues while carrying on their affair, all the times I'd made polite conversation with her while she was sleeping with my husband. I want them to face consequences. Real consequences, not just a quiet divorce where they get to ride off into the sunset with minimal disruption to their lives. Marcus smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. Then we'll need to be strategic about timing and disclosure. Let me do some research on Meridian's policies and corporate culture. In the meantime, I want you to continue gathering evidence, but be careful. Don't do anything that could be construed as illegal surveillance or harassment. What about moving out?
Not yet. Leaving the marital home before filing could be seen as abandonment, which might affect asset division. Stay put, but start preparing. Open individual bank accounts, redirect your business income, secure your important documents. Create separation without officially separating. I left Marcus's office with a timeline and a strategy that felt like hope disguised as revenge. Step 1 was already in motion. By the time I reached my car, Marcus had sent me an email with Meridian Financial's employee handbook attachment, specifically highlighting their policy on workplace relationships and conflicts of interest. The policy was clear. Romantic relationships between supervisors and direct reports were prohibited without disclosure to HR and management. Failure to disclose could result in disciplinary action up to and including termination for both parties. Moreover, any use of company resources, time, facilities, or equipment to conduct or facilitate personal relationships was grounds for immediate dismissal. I thought about Daniel's afternoon client meetings with Raven, their weekend strategy sessions, the business trips they'd probably taken together under the guise of work. How much company time and money had Meridian unknowingly invested in my husband's affair? My next stop was First National Bank, where David Torres had prepared a comprehensive overview of my options. Within 2 hours, I'd opened individual checking and savings accounts, redirected my business income to flow exclusively into my personal accounts, and established a safety deposit box for important documents and evidence. "Are you planning any major life changes?" David asked with a diplomatic curiosity of someone who'd seen this process before. "You could say that," I replied, signing the final paperwork that would give me complete financial independence within 30 days. "I'm taking control of my own future."
The afternoon was spent at my home office, working on legitimate client projects while internally processing the magnitude of what I was about to undertake. Every familiar object in my house, the kitchen table where Daniel and I had planned vacations, the living room couch where we'd binge-watched Netflix series, the coffee maker he'd bought me for my birthday, felt like artifacts from an archaeological dig of a dead relationship. But instead of sadness, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The cognitive dissonance of loving someone while suspecting them of betrayal was exhausting. Having concrete evidence and a plan of action felt like finally being able to breathe deeply again. Daniel came home at 7:30, with apologies about late meetings and promises to be more present. He brought flowers, grocery store carnations, not the expensive arrangements he'd once surprised me with, but the gesture felt calculated rather than spontaneous. "How was your client meeting?" he asked over the dinner I'd prepared, his attention seemingly focused on my answer. "Productive," I said truthfully. "We discussed some major changes to their current strategy. Sometimes you have to tear everything down before you can build something better." Something flickered across his expression. Uncertainty, maybe even suspicion. But he nodded and changed the subject to safer territory. His work, his clients, his challenges. I listened with the same attentive interest I'd always shown, while internally cataloging every lie, every misdirection, every moment when he chose deception over honesty. After dinner, while Daniel showered, I received a text from an unknown number. "This is Patricia. Can we move our Friday meeting to tomorrow at 4 p.m.? Something urgent has come up with your account review." My accountant being appropriately cautious with her communications. I texted back, "Of course, see you then." When Daniel emerged from the bathroom, I was already in bed with a book, The Picture of Domestic Tranquility. He slipped under the covers beside me, and for a moment, we lay in comfortable silence like the married couple we used to be. "Kaz, if something was wrong between us, you'd tell me, right?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel him watching me, waiting for my response, maybe fishing for signs that his secret was still safe. "Of course," I said, turning a page in my book without really seeing the words. "Communication is the foundation of any good marriage." He was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what changes in our lives, you'll always be important to me." The words felt like a preemptive eulogy for our marriage, and I wondered if he was preparing to ask for a divorce, planning to be the one who ended things before I could discover his betrayal. The irony was almost funning. If only he knew that his careful plans were about to collide with my much more thorough ones. "You're important to me, too," I said, and turned off my bedside lamp. "Good night, Daniel." Good night. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I lay in the darkness beside my cheating husband, thinking about new apartments and fresh starts, about the woman I'd been before I'd defined myself as half of a couple. Tomorrow, I'd meet with Patricia to secure my financial independence. This weekend, I'd start looking at apartments. And soon, very soon, I'd stop playing the role of the unsuspecting wife and start being the woman who took control of her own story. The thought should have been terrifying, but instead, it felt like freedom.
Friday afternoon's meeting with Patricia Hoffman revealed just how precarious Daniel's financial situation actually was. While I'd been building a thriving consulting business, my husband had been living well beyond his means, financing his double life with credit cards and loans I'd never known existed. "Your business assets are completely separate and protected," Patricia confirmed, sliding a comprehensive financial report across her desk. "But I'm concerned about some irregularities I discovered when I pulled your joint account histories." She opened a folder filled with bank statements and credit reports that painted a picture I hadn't expected. Daniel hadn't just been hiding money, he'd been hemorrhaging it. The expensive dinners, hotel rooms, jewelry, and weekend getaways with Raven had been funded by a web of debt that was starting to collapse. "He's been using the home equity line of credit as his personal slush fund," Patricia explained, pointing to a series of withdrawals that totaled nearly $45,000 over the past 6 months. "And he's maxed out 3 credit cards that are in his name only, but because you're married, the debt could potentially affect you in a divorce." "How is that possible?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "Community property state. Debts incurred during marriage can be considered joint obligations even if only one spouse knew about them.
The good news is, if you can prove the debt was used for extramarital affairs or hidden from you, a judge will likely assign it entirely to him. I thought about Daniel's casual dismissal of my concerns about our spending, his insistence that we keep finances separate for independence. He hadn't been protecting my autonomy, he'd been protecting his ability to fund his affair without my knowledge. There's something else, Patricia continued, her expression grim. He applied for a personal loan last week using your business income as supporting documentation. The application was denied because the lender couldn't verify your consent, but the fact that he tried suggests he's becoming desperate. A chill ran down my spine. Daniel had attempted to use my success to finance his betrayal without my knowledge or permission. The violation felt almost as deep as the affair itself. What do I need to do? Everything we discussed yesterday, but faster. I'm going to help you establish a credit monitoring system to alert you to any future attempts to use your information. And I strongly suggest you consider moving your business banking to an entirely different institution just to be safe. I left Patricia's office with a new understanding of the urgency of my situation. Daniel wasn't just cheating, he was financially reckless in ways that could destroy both of us, but only if I let him. That evening, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I've been thinking, I told Daniel over dinner, using the tone I employed with difficult clients who needed to be managed carefully. I think I should take on that West Coast expansion project after all, the one with the tech consortium in Portland. Daniel looked up from his salmon, fork paused midway to his mouth. I thought you decided against it because of the travel requirements. I did, but they've increased their offer by 30%, and honestly, we could use the extra income. You've been working so hard lately, staying late so often. I feel like I should be contributing more to our financial security. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, appealing to both his guilt about the affair and his ego about being a provider. I watched him process the implications, more money, but also more time away from home, more opportunity for him to see Raven, but also more independence for me. How much travel are we talking? He asked carefully. Initially, 2 weeks out of every month. Eventually, they want me to consider relocating there permanently to oversee their entire digital transformation. I paused, letting that sink in. It's a career-defining opportunity. Relocating? The word came out strangled. Just temporarily, maybe 6 months to a year. But the money would be incredible, and the networking opportunities. I shrugged, as if the decision was purely professional. I thought you'd be excited for me. Daniel set down his fork entirely. It's a big decision, Cass. We should talk about it more before you commit to anything. Of course, I agreed. But I need to give them an answer by Monday. The project starts in 2 weeks if I accept. That night, I heard Daniel on the phone in his study, voice low and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakably panicked. When he came to bed an hour later, he was distracted, checking his phone obsessively. Everything okay at work? I asked, innocently. Just some client issues, he said, but his voice carried a tension I hadn't heard since the early days of his promotion to senior partner. Saturday morning brought the first crack in Daniel's facade. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone rang. Marcus Chen, calling about documents I'd requested for our next meeting.
Cassandra, I've reviewed Meridian's corporate structure and recent personnel changes, he said. There are some interesting developments we should discuss. Are you free Monday morning? That should work, I replied, aware that Daniel was listening from the doorway. Is it related to the contract negotiations we discussed? Among other things, I'll email you the details. After I hung up, Daniel moved into the kitchen with studied casualness. New client? Legal consultation for the Portland project, I said smoothly. They want to ensure all the intellectual property transfers are handled properly. He nodded, but I caught him studying my face like he was looking for tells in a poker game. That afternoon, while I was allegedly grocery shopping, I drove to Riverside Heights, an upscale apartment complex I'd researched online. The leasing agent, an energetic woman named Jennifer, showed me a 2-bedroom unit with floor-to-ceiling windows and a balcony overlooking the city. The corporate housing package includes furniture, utilities, and a parking space, Jennifer explained, perfect for professionals in transition.
How quickly could someone move in? I asked, running my hand along the granite countertop in the pristine kitchen. With approved credit and first month's rent, you could have keys within 48 hours. I took the paperwork, promising to call by Monday. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about my future. This wasn't just about escaping Daniel and Raven. This was about reclaiming my independence, my sense of self, my right to build a life based on truth instead of lies. Sunday dinner at my parents' house provided an unexpected catalyst for the next phase of my plan. "You look tired, sweetheart," my mother observed as she passed the roast chicken. "Are you getting enough rest?" "Just busy with work," I replied, aware that Daniel was listening from the doorway. Speaking of work," my father interjected, "I saw an interesting article about Meridian Financial in the business section, something about internal policy changes regarding workplace relationships." Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. "Really? I must have missed that." "Probably nothing that affects you," Dad continued obliviously. "But apparently they're cracking down on undisclosed relationships between supervisors and subordinates. Some big lawsuit settlement made them revise their whole HR manual." The blood drained from Daniel's face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Corporate policies change all the time," he managed. "Usually just bureaucratic nonsense." "Maybe," Dad said, cutting his chicken with surgical precision. "But the article mentioned potential termination for violations. Seems pretty serious to me." The drive home was silent except for the radio playing soft jazz that felt inappropriately cheerful. Daniel gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him upright, while I stared out the window at the suburban landscape that was about to be my past. "Cass," he said finally, as we pulled into our driveway, "about this Portland project." "What about it?" "Maybe we should table it for now. Focus on what we have here. Work on our marriage. I feel like we've been drifting apart lately." I turned to look at him fully. This man who'd shared my bed while planning a future with another woman, who'd used my success to fund his betrayal, who was now panicking at the possibility that I might leave before he could arrange his exit on his own terms. "You think we've been drifting apart?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Haven't you felt it? The distance, the lack of connection? I know I've been working too much, not being present enough. But that can change. We can fix this." The desperation in his voice was almost palpable, not because he loved me, but because losing me before he was ready would complicate his carefully laid plans. If I left for Portland, if I became financially and geographically independent, he'd lose control of the narrative. He couldn't be the successful businessman who outgrew his neglectful wife if that wife was thriving on her own. "I appreciate that, Daniel," I said softly, "but I've already given them a preliminary yes. This opportunity is too important to pass up." "Important enough to risk our marriage?" The question hung between us like a blade. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how much he knew, how much he suspected, whether this was strategic maneuvering or genuine career ambition. "Is that what you think this is? A risk to our marriage?" "Any major decision that affects both of us is a risk if we don't make it together." "I absolutely agree," I agreed, opening the car door. "We should definitely make major decisions together, all of them. No secrets, no hidden agendas, complete honesty about everything that affects our future." He followed me into the house, and I could feel his anxiety radiating like heat. In the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of wine and offered him one, which he accepted with hands that trembled slightly. "To honest communication," I toasted, raising my glass.
To honest communication, he echoed, but the words sounded like glass breaking. That night, after Daniel fell into an uneasy sleep, I lay awake planning the final moves in a game he didn't even know we were playing. Monday, I'd signed the apartment lease.
Tuesday, I'd give my answer to the fictional Portland project, a carefully crafted story that would provide cover for my real exit strategy. And sometime very soon, Daniel would discover that while he'd been planning his future with Raven, I'd been planning my future without him. The irony was perfect. He thought he was managing me when actually I was managing him. All those skills I'd developed building my business, strategic thinking, long-term planning, careful resource management, were about to serve a very different purpose. Daniel and Raven wanted to play games with my life. Fine. But they were about to learn that I was much better at this particular game than either of them had imagined. Monday morning arrived with the weight of impending revelation. I dressed in my sharpest business attire, the charcoal suit that had closed my biggest deals, paired with the red heels that made me feel invincible. Today wasn't just about gathering evidence anymore. Today was about weaponizing it. My first stop was Marcus Chen's office, where he'd prepared a comprehensive dossier that made my amateur investigation look quaint by comparison. Professional investigators, it turned out, could accomplish in 3 days what had taken me weeks to piece together. "Your instincts were correct," Marcus said, sliding a thick folder across his mahogany desk. "This goes much deeper than a simple affair." The photographs hit me first. Daniel and Raven at the Grandview Hotel downtown, not once, but 7 separate occasions over the past 4 months. Raven's Lexus parked in our driveway on days when I was supposedly traveling, but was actually just across town at client meetings. Daniel using company credit cards to pay for romantic dinners that Meridian's expense policies explicitly prohibited for personal use. But this is the piece that changes everything, Marcus continued, pulling out a document that made my blood run cold. Raven Sinclair was hired at Meridian specifically because of her previous relationship with Daniel. I stared at the employment records, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Previous relationship? They dated in college, broke up when she graduated early and moved to Boston for her MBA. She applied for the assistant position specifically to work with him, and Daniel was the one who recommended her hiring over 12 other qualified candidates. The betrayal crystallized into something so much worse than I had imagined. This wasn't a workplace romance that had developed organically. This was a premeditated reunion orchestrated by 2 people who had decided to use my marriage as their cover story while they figured out how to be together again. "How long have you known about this?" wasn't the question I'd been planning to ask my husband for 5 years, but apparently it was the question that mattered now. "There's more," Marcus said gently, recognizing the shock on my face. "Daniel's been liquidating assets for the past 3 months. The home equity loans, the credit card debt, it wasn't just funding their affair. He's been moving money into offshore accounts that we can trace back to shell companies Raven helped him establish." The room spun slightly. "He's been embezzling from our joint assets?" Not embezzling exactly, since the accounts were legally accessible to him, but hiding marital assets with intent to defraud in a divorce proceeding, that's a felony in this state. Marcus opened his laptop and showed me bank transfer records that told the story of systematic financial betrayal. Daniel hadn't just been cheating on me. He'd been preparing to leave me with nothing while setting himself and Raven up for a comfortable future funded with money that should have been protected as marital property. "The good news," he continued, "is that intent to defraud makes everything they've taken recoverable with penalties. The bad news is that we need to act immediately before they can move more assets beyond our reach. What do you recommend?" "We file for divorce today with a motion for immediate asset freezing and a request for sanctions based on financial misconduct. But first, we need to neutralize their ability to claim victim status." Marcus pulled out another file, this one containing printed emails and text messages that went back not months, but years. My investigator accessed Daniel's cloud backups. "Did you know he's been planning this since before you got married?" The emails were dated from our engagement period, casual messages between Daniel and Raven discussing their temporary separation while he got settled with his practice wife. Messages about how I was good for his career trajectory and would provide financial stability while they figured out their real future.
I hadn't been married to Daniel for 5 years. I'd been Daniel and Raven's unknowing business partner in a long-term fraud scheme disguised as a marriage. I need copies of everything, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, and I need to make some phone calls.
The next 3 hours were a masterclass in strategic communication. First, I called Jennifer at Riverside Heights and signed the apartment lease with a move-in date of Friday. Then, I contacted my 3 biggest clients and activated the family emergency clause in our contracts, which would allow me to work remotely for up to 6 months with no penalty. Finally, I made the call I'd been both dreading and anticipating, Meridian Financial's Human Resources Department. "This is Cassandra Ashworth," I said to HR Director Linda Morrison, a woman I'd met at several company social events. "I need to schedule a confidential meeting regarding a potential violation of company policy by my husband, Daniel Ashworth, and his assistant, Raven Sinclair." Linda's professional tone sharpened immediately. "Can you provide more details about the nature of the alleged violation?" "Undisclosed romantic relationship between a supervisor and direct report, misuse of company resources for personal activities, and potential conflicts of interest related to the hiring process. I have documentation." "How much documentation?" "Photographs, financial records, email correspondence, and evidence of policy violations dating back 8 months. I can be there this afternoon, if that works for your schedule." "I'll clear my calendar. Can you be here at 2 p.m.? "I'll be there." The Meridian Financial building looked different when you were walking in to destroy someone's career instead of attending their company Christmas party. Linda Morrison met me in the lobby personally, a tall woman with silver hair and the kind of no-nonsense bearing that suggested she'd handled situations like this before. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, shaking my hand with a grip that could crack walnuts, "let's go somewhere private where we can discuss this matter thoroughly." Her office was a monument to corporate efficiency, with motivational posters about integrity and ethical leadership that would have been funny under different circumstances. Linda gestured for me to sit across from her desk, then pulled out a legal pad and digital recorder. "Before we begin, I want you to understand that any information you provide will be investigated thoroughly, and if substantiated, will result in disciplinary action up to and including termination for the employees involved. Are you prepared to proceed?" "I am." For the next 90 minutes, I presented evidence with the methodical precision of a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. The photographs of Daniel and Raven at hotels during work hours, credit card statements showing company funds used for personal dinners and gifts, email chains discussing their relationship and future plans. Most damaging of all, the documentation showing that Raven had been hired specifically because of her prior relationship with Daniel, without disclosure to the company. Linda asked pointed questions, took detailed notes, and photographed every document I provided. Her expression grew more severe with each revelation. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said finally, "I want you to know that Meridian Financial takes these violations extremely seriously. We have a zero-tolerance policy for undisclosed relationships between supervisors and subordinates, and the misuse of company resources for personal gain is grounds for immediate termination and potential criminal charges." "What happens next?" "Both employees will be suspended pending a full investigation, which will begin tomorrow morning. If our investigation confirms what you've shown me today, they will be terminated immediately. Their final paychecks will be adjusted to recoup any misappropriated funds, and we will consider pursuing legal action for breach of fiduciary duty." I felt something like vindication settling in my chest, warm and solid. "How long does the investigation typically take?" "With documentation this comprehensive, probably less than a week. We'll also be reviewing their recent work to ensure no client confidentiality was breached and no company proprietary information was shared inappropriately." Linda walked me to the elevator, her expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Ashworth, can I ask, why did you decide to bring this to us instead of just filing for divorce quietly?" I considered the question as the elevator doors opened. "Because they didn't just betray me personally, they betrayed every principle this company claims to stand for. And because actions should have consequences, not just for the people who commit them, but for the institutions that enable them." "I understand completely," Linda said, extending her hand again. "You've done the right thing. We'll be in touch as the investigation proceeds." The drive home gave me time to process what I'd just set in motion.
By tomorrow morning, Daniel and Raven would be suspended from their jobs, facing potential termination and legal consequences. Their carefully planned future would be in ruins, and they'd still have no idea that I knew about their affair. But I wasn't done yet. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Marcus. Judge-approved emergency asset freeze. All joint accounts and Daniel's individual accounts are now frozen pending full financial disclosure. Well done." I pulled into our driveway at 5:30, the same time I'd arrived home from my fake client meeting the previous week. Daniel's car was already there, which meant he either left work early or had been suspended already. My pulse quickened as I gathered my purse and laptop bag. Inside, I found Daniel pacing the living room like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear.
No, I understand there's an investigation, but you have to understand, this is all a misunderstanding, he was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. Raven and I have always maintained professional boundaries. He spotted me and quickly ended the call. Cass, you're home early. Client meeting ended sooner than expected, I said, hanging my purse on its usual hook by the door. You're home early too. How was your day? Daniel's attempt at a casual smile failed spectacularly. Just some HR nonsense at work. Nothing important. HR nonsense. Someone made some kind of complaint about workplace relationships. Probably just office gossip getting blown out of proportion. These things happen in corporate environments. I nodded sympathetically, mentally noting that he still couldn't bring himself to tell me the truth, even when his world was collapsing around him. I'm sure it will all work out, I said reassuringly. You've always been so professional at work. I can't imagine anyone having legitimate concerns about your conduct. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, but Daniel managed another fake smile. Exactly. It's probably just someone with an agenda trying to cause trouble. Probably, I agreed, heading toward the kitchen. Are you hungry? I thought I'd make that pasta dish you like. Actually, Daniel said, following me, I was thinking maybe we should talk about that Portland opportunity. I've been doing some research and I'm not sure it's the right move for us right now. Oh. I turned to face him, noting the desperate edge in his voice. What kind of research? Just market conditions, cost of living adjustments, the impact on our long-term financial planning. Maybe we should focus on opportunities here in town instead. Poor Daniel. He had no idea that his long-term financial planning was about to become a legal liability, not a romantic possibility. But I wasn't ready to show my hand quite yet. That's sweet of you to be concerned about our finances, I said, opening the refrigerator to retrieve ingredients for dinner. But I've already committed to the project. They're depending on me. Cass, please, can't we just talk about this? I turned to study his face, the desperation he was trying to hide, the fear he couldn't quite suppress, and the realization that his carefully constructed plans were unraveling faster than he could adjust to them. Of course we can talk, I said gently. We can talk about anything you want, Daniel. Honesty is the foundation of any good marriage, don't you think? He nodded quickly, relief flooding his features. He had no idea that the conversation we were about to have would be nothing like what he was expecting. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected phone call that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my social circle. The caller was Amanda Richardson, Daniel's colleague's wife, someone I'd known peripherally through company events, but had never considered a close friend. Cassandra, she said, her voice carrying a nervous energy I'd never heard before. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from the company directory. I was wondering, could we meet for coffee today? There's something I think you should know. My pulse quickened. Of course. Is everything all right? I'd rather discuss it in person, if that's okay. Are you free around 11? That little cafe on 3rd Street. I'll be there.
Cafe Luna was one of those deliberately cozy places that attracted suburban women who needed neutral territory for difficult conversations. Amanda was already waiting when I arrived, nursing what looked like her second latte and checking her phone nervously. "Amanda," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "You sounded upset on the phone. What's going on?" She looked up, and I was startled to see her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying. "Cassandra, I'm going to ask you something, and please know that I'm not asking to be malicious or gossipy. I'm asking because I think we're in similar situations." My stomach tightened. "Similar how?" "Your husband and his assistant." The words came out in a rush. Have you noticed anything unusual about their working relationship?" I kept my expression carefully neutral, though inside everything shifted into sharp focus. "What kind of unusual?" She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph that made my heart stop. Daniel and Raven at a restaurant downtown, her hand on his across the table, looking at each other with unmistakable intimacy. "My husband took this last Thursday night when he was having dinner with a client. He wasn't trying to spy or anything. He just happened to see them and thought it looked inappropriate. When he mentioned it to me, I told him he was probably misreading the situation, that they were just colleagues having a business dinner." She swiped to another photo, this one showing Daniel's hand caressing Raven's face in the restaurant's parking lot.
But then he showed me this one, and I knew we weren't talking about a business dinner anymore. I stared at the images, my mind racing. Not only did I now have additional evidence of their affair, but I had an unexpected ally and someone who'd witnessed their betrayal firsthand. "Amanda," I said carefully, "why are you showing me this?" Because 6 months ago, I found out my own husband was having an affair with someone from his office. I went through exactly what I think you might be going through right now. The confusion, the self-doubt, the wondering if you're seeing things that aren't really there. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I stayed silent for too long, made excuses for him, tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. I wish someone had come to me with proof when I was still questioning my own sanity. "What did you ultimately do?" I asked. "I hired a private investigator, gathered evidence, and filed for divorce. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most liberating. My ex-husband tried to gaslight me right up until the moment I presented him with photographs and financial records. Then, suddenly, he wanted to work things out." Amanda's story resonated with a clarity that was almost painful. Here was someone who'd walked the path I was currently navigating, someone who understood the unique blend of betrayal and strategic thinking required to protect yourself from a cheating spouse. "Can I ask you something?" Amanda continued. "Are you planning to confront him, or are you building a case first?" "Building a case," I admitted. "I want to make sure I have everything documented before he knows that I know." Amanda's smile was the first genuine expression I'd seen from her that morning. "Good. That's exactly what you should do. And if you need any help or support, I'm here. I know how isolating this process can be." "Actually," I said, making a decision that surprised even me, "there is something you could help with. Would you be willing to provide copies of those photographs for my attorney?" "Already printed and ready to go," she said, pulling an envelope from her purse. I figured if I was going to have this conversation, I should come prepared. Over the next hour, Amanda and I shared stories that painted a picture of systematic deception by our respective husbands. Her ex-husband had used many of the same tactics as Daniel, claiming late work nights, taking mysterious phone calls, becoming defensive when questioned about changes in routine. The thing that hurt most wasn't even the cheating, Amanda reflected. It was realizing how little respect he had for my intelligence. He actually thought I was too stupid to notice that he was living a completely different life. "How are you doing now, after the divorce?" "Honestly, better than I've been in years. I got the house, half of everything, and alimony. But more than that, I got my self-respect back. I'm dating someone new now, a man who treats me like an equal partner instead of a convenient placeholder."
Amanda's transformation was visible as she talked about her new life. Her shoulders straightened, her voice grew stronger, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely happy. "There's something else I want to tell you," she said as we prepared to leave. "There's a support group that meets Thursday evenings at the community center. Women who've been through similar situations. It's informal, just coffee and conversation, but it might be helpful." "A support group?" "Nothing official or therapeutic, just women who understand what it's like to rebuild your life after someone you trusted tries to destroy it. We call ourselves the Phoenix Club, rising from the ashes and all that." The name made me smile despite everything. "How many members?" 8 regular attendees, but we've had as many as 15 at some meetings. All different situations: divorce, financial abuse, emotional manipulation. But we all understand what it feels like to have someone underestimate your strength. I took the information card she offered, already knowing I'd attend the next meeting. The isolation I hadn't even realized I was feeling began to lift slightly. "Amanda," I said as we walked to our cars, "thank you for reaching out, for the photographs, for everything. I wasn't sure I could trust my own judgment anymore." "That's exactly what they want," she replied firmly. "They want us to doubt ourselves, to think we're being paranoid or irrational. But we're not. We're survivors." That afternoon, while Daniel was presumably dealing with his suspension crisis, I attended my first Phoenix Club meeting. The community center conference room was arranged in a circle of folding chairs, with a coffee station and a box of tissues strategically placed on a side table. The women who gathered there were nothing like what I had expected. Professional, accomplished, articulate, not victims, but victors. Each had a story of betrayal and strategic recovery that made my situation feel less unique and more manageable. Sarah, a marketing executive, had discovered her husband's gambling addiction when the mortgage company called about missed payments. Instead of confronting him immediately, she'd spent 3 months documenting his losses and protecting her assets before filing for divorce.
Jennifer, a nurse, had found out about her husband's affair through medical bills for STD testing that he'd tried to hide. She'd used her medical knowledge to ensure her own health was protected while gathering evidence of his infidelity and endangering behavior. Lisa, a teacher, had uncovered her husband's financial abuse when she tried to apply for a car loan and discovered he'd destroyed her credit score with hidden debt. She'd spent 6 months rebuilding her financial identity while planning her exit strategy. "The thing about being betrayed by someone you trust," Sarah explained to the group, "is that you learn skills you never knew you needed. Investigation, financial planning, legal strategy, emotional compartmentalization. We become our own rescue teams." When it came time for me to share, I found myself speaking more openly than I'd expected. "I'm still in the middle of my situation," I admitted. "My husband doesn't know that I know about his affair, and I'm using that time to document everything and protect my assets. But some days I feel like I'm living a double life." "That's because you are," Lisa said gently, "but it's temporary and it's necessary. You're not being deceptive, you're being strategic. There's a difference." Jennifer nodded in agreement. "The hardest part is maintaining the performance while you're building your case. But remember, they performed for you much longer than you're performing for them." As the meeting wound down, several women gave me their contact information, creating a network of support I hadn't known I needed. For the first time since discovering Daniel's betrayal, I felt like I wasn't navigating this alone. Walking to my car after the meeting, I called Marcus Chen with an update on my expanded evidence collection and new witness statements. Then I called the Riverside Heights apartment complex to confirm my Friday move-in date. But the most important call was to my own business line, where I left a message updating my voicemail to reflect new contact information and expanded services. For the first time in months, I was thinking about my professional future with genuine excitement, instead of just survival planning. That evening, Daniel came home from what I now knew was his suspension meeting, looking like he'd aged 5 years in one day. His usual confident posture was gone, replaced by the defeated slouch of a man whose carefully constructed world was collapsing.
Rough day? I asked sympathetically, playing my part in our increasingly absurd domestic theater. You could say that, he replied, loosening his tie with hands that trembled slightly. Sometimes corporate politics can be really unfair. I'm sorry to hear that. Anything I can do to help? He looked at me then with an expression I couldn't quite read, desperation mixed with calculation, like he was trying to figure out how much I knew and how he could use my apparent ignorance to his advantage. Actually, he said slowly, I've been thinking more about that Portland project. Maybe you're right. Maybe a change of scenery would be good for both of us. I almost laughed at the transparency of his manipulation. Now that his own situation was imploding, he wanted me far away where I couldn't witness his professional and personal destruction. Really? I said, injecting surprised pleasure into my voice. I thought you were concerned about the impact on our marriage. I've realized that supporting your career growth is more important than my comfort zone, he said, the words sounding rehearsed. When would you need to start? Monday, if I accepted the offer. Then you should accept it, he said with fake enthusiasm that would have been insulting if it weren't for pathetically transparent. We can make the distance work. Couples do it all the time. Are you sure? It would mean being apart for weeks at a time. I'm sure, he said firmly. Your happiness and success matter more than anything else. Looking at Daniel's face as he lied to me about prioritizing my happiness while planning his future with another woman, I felt the last vestiges of love I'd been carrying transform into something much cleaner and more useful. Absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. Thank you for being so supportive, I said, meaning every word in ways he couldn't possibly understand. I'll call them tomorrow and accept the position. Daniel's smile of relief was almost pitifully obvious. He thought he was managing me, when actually I was about to disappear from his life so completely that he'd spend years regretting the day he underestimated the woman he'd married. But first, I had a Phoenix Club meeting to attend Thursday evening, where I planned to share some very interesting updates with my new support network. Thursday evening brought the phone call that would end our charade forever. I was in my home office, supposedly reviewing contracts for the fictional Portland project, when Marcus Chen called with news that accelerated everything. Cassandra, we need to move faster than planned, he said, his usually calm voice carrying an edge of urgency. My investigator discovered that Daniel and Raven have been planning to flee the country. They have tickets to Switzerland for Sunday morning, and they've been liquidating remaining assets to fund their escape.
My blood turned to ice. Switzerland? Non-extradition banking laws, probably. They've been preparing for the possibility that their scheme would be discovered. If they leave the country before we can serve divorce papers and enforce the asset freeze, recovering your money becomes exponentially more difficult. What do? We serve him tonight. I have the papers ready and have arranged for a process server to be at your house within the hour. Are you prepared for this conversation to happen now instead of on your timeline? I looked around my office, the space where I'd built my consulting business, where I'd planned my strategic exit from a fraudulent marriage, where I'd spent 5 years believing I was building a life with someone who'd been planning to rob me blind. I'm ready, I said. Good. One more thing. Meridian completed their investigation today. Both Daniel and Raven were terminated for cause, effective immediately. They'll be escorted from the building tomorrow to collect their personal items, and the company is pursuing criminal charges for misuse of corporate resources. The satisfaction I felt was sharp and clean, like the click of a perfectly fitted puzzle piece. How much do they know about my involvement in the investigation? Nothing official, but they're not stupid. By tomorrow morning, they'll have figured out that someone provided Meridian with very detailed documentation. The timing will make it obvious. Then it's definitely time to end this performance. The process server arrived at 7:15 p.m., a professional woman named Janet, who looked like she'd served papers in more dramatic situations than suburban infidelity cases.
She handed me the divorce documents with business-like efficiency, then positioned herself in the living room to wait for Daniel's return. "How do you usually handle situations like this?" I asked, surprised by my own nervousness now that the moment had finally arrived. "Every case is different, but in my experience, the spouses who've been planning their exit strategy are usually calmer than the ones who are caught completely off guard." "And which category do I fall into?" She smiled. "Definitely the first. You're probably going to handle this better than he is." Daniel's car pulled into the driveway at 7:43 p.m. I watched through the window as he sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, talking on his phone with animated gestures that suggested panic. When he finally came inside, his face had the grayish pallor of a man whose world was disintegrating in real time. "Cass?" he called out, his voice carrying a forced casualness that immediately alerted him something was wrong. "You home?" "In the living room." He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie, and stopped cold when he saw Janet sitting primly in our armchair with her official briefcase and clipboard. "Daniel Ashworth?" Janet asked, standing. "Who's asking?" But his voice already carried the hollow tone of someone who knew exactly what was happening. "You're being served with divorce papers," Janet said, extending the legal documents with practiced efficiency. "You have 30 days to respond through your attorney." Daniel took the papers like they might bite him, his eyes darting between Janet and me with increasing panic. "Cass, what the hell is going on?" "Janet, thank you," I said, calmly. "I think we can handle the rest privately." She gathered her briefcase and headed for the door. "Good luck, Mrs. Ashworth. You have my card if you need anything." After she left, Daniel and I stood in our living room, the room where we'd hosted dinner parties and watched movies and planned vacations we'd never take, staring at each other across a chasm that had always existed but was only now visible. "Cass," Daniel said, carefully, setting the papers on the coffee table like they were radioactive. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Has there?" I moved to the mantel and picked up our wedding photo, studying the faces of two people who'd promised to love and honor each other. "What kind of misunderstanding did you have in mind?" "This is obviously some kind of reaction to the stress I've been under at work. I know I haven't been present lately, but filing for divorce seems like an extreme response to a rough patch." His ability to lie even now is almost impressive. I set down the wedding photo and turned to face him fully. "Daniel, I know about Raven." The color drained from his face so completely I thought he might faint. "Know what about Raven?" "I know about the affair. I know about the money you've been hiding. I know about the college relationship you never mentioned. I know about the Switzerland trip you booked for Sunday. I know about the shell companies and the offshore accounts and the plan to leave me with nothing while you two start over with assets you stole from our marriage." Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. He sank onto the couch, staring at me with the horrified expression of someone whose carefully constructed lies had just collapsed like a house of cards. "How long have you known?" He whispered. "Since Tuesday afternoon when I came home early and found you in our bed together." "Tuesday? But we had dinner, we talked about Portland. You seemed..."
Normal? Happy? Unsuspecting? I sat down across from him, maintaining the calm tone that was clearly more unnerving than screaming would have been. That's because I was gathering evidence and protecting my assets while you thought you were fooling me. Daniel's hands were shaking now. "Cass, I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." "Really?" "Because it looks like you and your college girlfriend orchestrated a 5-year fraud scheme where she got herself hired as your assistant so you could rekindle your relationship while using me as financial security until you were ready to disappear with half of everything we built together. We didn't plan..." "Daniel," my voice cut through his stammering like a blade. "I have recordings. I have photographs, I have financial records, I have witness statements, I have documentation of every lie you've told and every asset you've hidden. Meridian fired both of you today, and they're pursuing criminal charges.
Your Swiss bank accounts have been frozen by court order. The home equity line of credit you've been draining is now evidence in a fraud investigation. He stared at me like I'd transformed into someone completely unfamiliar, which, in a way, I had. The woman you married wasn't stupid, Daniel. She was just trusting. But the woman sitting here now, she's the one who built a 6-figure business from nothing, who knows how to research and strategize and execute long-term plans. You taught me to be methodical and thorough. Congratulations, I learned the lesson. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely audible. I want you out of this house by Sunday morning. I want full financial disclosure of every account, every investment, every debt you've hidden from me. I want the offshore money returned to marital asset accounts where it belongs. And I want you to sign the divorce papers without contesting the terms my attorney has outlined. And if I don't, then Marcus Chen will file criminal charges for financial fraud, and your new legal problems will make the divorce proceedings look like a minor inconvenience. You'll go to prison, Daniel, not country club minimum security, actual federal prison for interstate financial fraud. The fight went out of him all at once, like air escaping from a punctured balloon. Cass, please, I know I made mistakes, but we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can rebuild trust. No. The word came out with finality that surprised even me. You didn't make mistakes, Daniel. You made choices. Every single day for months, you chose to lie to me, steal from me, and plan a future that didn't include me while pretending to be a loving husband. Those weren't mistakes. They were calculated decisions. But I love you, he said desperately. Whatever I did with Raven, it doesn't change that. I looked at this man who'd shared my bed for 5 years, who met my parents and planned our anniversary dinners and promised me a future built on lies, and felt nothing but pity. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, he glanced at it, and I caught the sender's name on the screen. Raven. Is she wondering where you are? Worried about the Switzerland plans now that you've both been fired and served with legal papers? How did you know about Switzerland? I told you. I know everything. The question is, what are you going to do now? Fight this and face criminal charges, or sign the papers and try to rebuild whatever life you can from the wreckage you created? Daniel looked around our living room one last time, taking in the home we'd built together, the life he'd systematically destroyed for the thrill of an affair with someone who'd helped him plan my financial ruin. What happens to Raven? He asked. That's not my problem. She made her choices too. He nodded slowly, the resignation of someone who'd finally understood that the game was over and he'd lost. I'll sign the papers. Good. Marcus will have them ready tomorrow. You have until Sunday morning to be out of the house. Where will I go? Again, not my problem, but I'd suggest somewhere in the continental United States since your passport has been flagged by the courts. Daniel stood up slowly, like a much older man than I had married. At the door, he turned back one last time. For what it's worth, Cass, I really am sorry. I know you are. You're sorry you got caught. After he left, I sat in the quiet house for a long time, processing the end of a marriage that had been over long before I'd discovered the truth. The silence wasn't empty, it was peaceful, clean, honest. My phone rang around 10 p.m. It was Amanda from the Phoenix Club. How did it go? She asked gently.
It's over, I said. He signed the papers, he's moving out Sunday. How are you feeling? I considered the question, taking inventory of my emotional state. Relieved, sad for the marriage I thought we had, but mostly free. That's exactly how I felt, Amanda said. The sadness fades, but the freedom lasts forever. Saturday morning, I woke up in my house now, and made coffee in a kitchen that belonged entirely to me. My Sunday evening, Daniel would be gone, and I'd begun the process of reclaiming my life from the fiction we'd been living.
The woman who discovered her husband's betrayal just 5 days ago felt like a different person than the one making plans in her empty house. She'd been reactive, hurt, vulnerable. This woman was proactive, strategic, empowered. Daniel had taught me to be thorough. I'd learned the lesson so well that I'd dismantled his entire world with the precision of a master strategist. Now, it was time to build something new. 6 months later, I stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new downtown office, watching the city pulse with life 23 floors below. Brooks Digital Solutions had expanded beyond anything I had imagined possible when I was sneaking around my own house, gathering evidence of my husband's betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me that Daniel's destruction had become the catalyst for my greatest professional success. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. True to his word, Daniel had signed every paper Marcus put in front of him, accepting terms that left him with barely enough to rent a studio apartment across town. The asset recovery had been more successful than we dared hope. Swiss authorities had frozen and returned over $200,000 that Daniel and Raven had moved offshore, plus penalties that brought my total recovery to nearly $300,000. But the money, satisfying as it was, hadn't been the real victory. The real victory was the woman I'd become in the process of reclaiming my life. My assistant, Jordan, a sharp 25-year-old MBA who reminded me of myself at that age, minus the misplaced trust in cheating partners, knocked on my office door. "Your 4 o'clock is here. The Phoenix Foundation board meeting?" "Already?" I glanced at my watch, surprised by how quickly the afternoon had passed. "Send them to the conference room. I'll be right there." The Phoenix Foundation had been Amanda Richardson's idea, born out of our informal support group and evolved into something much more ambitious. What started as 8 women meeting in a community center had grown into a nonprofit organization providing legal, financial, and emotional resources to women navigating betrayal and divorce. In the conference room, I found Amanda along with 5 other board members, all women whose stories of strategic recovery had inspired the foundation's mission. Sarah, the marketing executive, now ran our digital outreach programs. Jennifer, the nurse, headed our health and wellness initiatives. Lisa, the teacher, managed our educational workshops on financial literacy and legal rights. "The quarterly numbers are incredible," Amanda said, sliding a report across the conference table. "We've helped 43 women this quarter alone, with an average asset recovery rate of 67%. More importantly, our post-divorce follow-up surveys show that 89% of our clients report improved quality of life within 6 months of their final decree." I scanned the statistics with the same satisfaction I'd once felt closing major business deals. But this was different, better. This wasn't just about profit margins or market penetration. This was about fundamentally changing women's lives. "What about the legal clinic?" I asked Jennifer, who coordinated with Marcus Chen's firm to provide sliding scale legal services. "Booked solid for the next 3 months. Marcus hired 2 additional attorneys specifically to handle foundation referrals. He says working with our clients is more rewarding than corporate law ever was." "And the media requests?" "Increasing daily," Sarah reported. 3 more podcast interviews next week, and Good Morning America wants to do a feature on strategic divorce planning. They specifically requested you as the primary interview subject. I considered the request. 6 months ago, the thought of publicly discussing my private humiliation would have horrified me. Now it felt like an opportunity to help other women recognize their own strength. "Schedule it," I decided, "but make sure they understand this isn't about revenge or husband bashing. It's about empowerment and strategic thinking." After the meeting, I returned to my office to find Jordan reviewing tomorrow's calendar with her usual meticulous attention to detail. "Don't forget you have dinner with your parents tonight, and your 7 a.m. breakfast meeting with the Portland Tech Consortium, the real one this time." I laughed, remembering the fictitious Portland project that had provided perfect cover for my divorce preparations. The irony is that they offered me an even better deal once they heard about the foundation. Success builds on success. Speaking of success, Jordan handed me an envelope with a return address I didn't recognize. This came by special delivery. The sender requested you open it privately. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery and a cashier's check that made me blink twice to ensure I'd read the amount correctly.
"Dear Mrs. Ashworth," the letter began, "you don't know me, but 6 months ago, my sister attended one of your early Phoenix Club meetings. The strategies and support she received there gave her the courage to leave an abusive marriage and rebuild her life. Sadly, she passed away in a car accident last month, but in her will, she requested that I donate her divorce settlement to your foundation. She said you taught her that women don't have to accept being diminished by the men who claim to love them. Please accept this donation in memory of Rebecca Martinez, who died free. The check was for $150,000. I sat in my office chair, holding the letter and check, overwhelmed by the ripple effects of decisions I'd made in desperation 6 months earlier. A woman I'd never met had been inspired by my story to reclaim her own life, and now her memory would help dozens of other women do the same. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the article about your foundation in Business Weekly. Congratulations on your success. D. Daniel. Still monitoring my life from whatever diminished existence he'd built from the ruins of his choices, I deleted the message without responding. He was part of my past now, a cautionary tale in strategic planning and the importance of choosing partners who saw me as an equal rather than a resource to be exploited. That evening, over dinner with my parents at their favorite restaurant, my mother studied my face with the penetrating gaze that had seen through my childhood deceptions and teenage dramas. "You look different," she observed. "Stronger. More yourself, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," I replied. "I spent 5 years trying to be the woman I thought Daniel wanted me to be. Now I get to be exactly who I actually am." "And who is that?" my father asked with genuine curiosity. I considered the question while watching the restaurant's other diners, couples sharing intimate conversations, families celebrating milestones, friends laughing over shared memories. All of them engaged in the fundamentally human act of connecting authentically with people who saw and valued them for who they really were. "Someone who doesn't apologize for her success," I said finally. "Someone who trusts her instincts and acts on them. Someone who helps other women discover their own strength instead of hiding hers to make insecure men feel comfortable." My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Not for the business success or the foundation, though those are wonderful. I'm proud of you for refusing to let someone else's betrayal make you smaller." Driving home to my downtown loft, the space I'd chosen for its soaring ceilings and abundant natural light, the opposite of every compromise I'd made in the suburban house I'd shared with Daniel, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the worst experience of my life. I'd discovered reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned to trust my instincts instead of explaining them away. I'd built a support network of women who understood that surviving betrayal required both emotional healing and strategic action. Most importantly, I'd learned that love, real love, doesn't ask you to diminish yourself. It celebrates your success, supports your growth, and honors your intelligence. Daniel had taught me what love wasn't, which had prepared me to eventually recognize what it could be. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped onto my balcony, looking out over a city full of lights and possibilities. Tomorrow, I'd help more women discover their own power. Next week, I'd appear on national television to discuss strategic thinking and self-advocacy. Next month, I'd break ground on the Foundation's new headquarters, a building designed specifically to provide comprehensive support services for women rebuilding their lives. But tonight, I simply stood in my own space, breathing air that belonged entirely to me, grateful for the woman I'd become through surviving the worst and building something beautiful from the wreckage. My phone rang. Amanda, calling to share news about a woman who'd successfully left an abusive marriage using strategies we'd developed together. She wanted me to tell you specifically that she taught her the difference between reacting and responding. She said that distinction saved her life. After we hung up, I pulled out my laptop and began writing what would become my first book, Strategic Divorce: How to Reclaim Your Power When Someone You Trust Betrays You. Not a bitter memoir or a revenge fantasy, but a practical guide for women who needed to know that betrayal could become the beginning of their most authentic life, not the end of their story. The dedication would read, "For every woman who discovered that the most important relationship she needed to rebuild was the one with herself."
Daniel had thought he was teaching me to be small, quiet, and grateful for scraps of attention and affection. Instead, he'd taught me to be methodical, strategic, and utterly unwilling to accept less than I deserved. I'd learned the lessons so well